Okay, here we are filming from our cabin. It's still lightly snowing out. It stopped for a while, but we have probably around 13, 14 inches with a little bit more to come. We've been plowed out, but we can't go any further than the end of our driveway. So today is the demonstration of the barn with a little bit of snow. This is courtesy of Sydney, which is a real nice photo. We're using ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, raw sienna, yellow medium, burnt sienna, and brown madder. Now, what I'm going to do is explain to you as much as possible, because I know you can't ask questions at this point. I'm going to be painting basically wet on dry paper for the most part, with the exception of the sky up here in the background. Then I'm going to go into the trees and then the barn. And I'm going to leave the white of the paper in between here for the time being, in the foreground and in this hill in the background. So I'm going to wet, not liberally, but very quickly, the sky, so that the tops of the trees will blend into it. And I have this board on a slight slant. So I'm going to take the cobalt blue, and we have a very gray sky, and some of the raw sienna. And it's a very light sky. So I'm going to paint this in really light. And I'm going to add a little bit more raw sienna to it so that the sky is not the same color all the way across. So this is very fluid up here. And I don't mind if there's white of the paper showing here and there, because it's going to help balance off the snow itself. So I'm going to bring this right down into the tops of the trees. And then I'm going to take my smaller pointed oval, and I am going to paint the tree line back here. So I'm taking the cobalt blue that I had here, a little bit of the burnt sienna, and I'm going to add in a little bit of ultramarine blue. And I'm just going to allow this to feather up into here. So keeping your edges soft as long as you can really helps the painting. And I'm going to add a little bit of the burnt sienna in here. I'm going to paint around the dome of the silo. And I'm going to add a little bit of that darker value as we go down in here. And I'm going to paint very carefully around the barn at this point. And then again up around the silo. I did move the silo because it was too big of an element in the foreground. So I'm going to try to be as careful as I can. And then it gets a little bit grayer as it moves away from us back here. And so I'm going to take a little bit of that burnt sienna with the ultramarine blue and some more of the raw sienna here. And I'm just going to fuzz that off. I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue to cool it. And I am painting again up against the silo here very carefully, like so. And what I did right here is I allowed the snow to kind of creep up into the trees there. I'm going to take a smaller brush here, and I'm going to take some of the same paint here, and I'm going to add in some of the trees that are coming out onto the snow area here. And I'm going to bring in a few here and there. Nothing too dramatic, but it does, when you can do it like this and just sort of allow them to creep up into there, that's fine. I'm going to take some more of this burnt sienna here, and I'm going to put it up in here because I still want this to remain on the softer side up here. And add a little bit of the ultramarine blue that's already on my palette here. And I'm just going to bring that right on over. So we have a fairly colorful background. I'm also going to take a little bit of that raw sienna and I'm going to drop it in here while it's still wet. And I'm going to take my paper towel here because suddenly we had a little bit of a burst of that color, like so. And I'm going to take a little bit more of the burnt sienna in with the raw sienna over here to make it a little bit more of an impact. And I'm going to neaten up around the top of the silo. Because I didn't quite hit the mark. There we go. And then down the side. Now, at this point, I'm going to take, while it's wet, my toothbrush and add a little bit of cobalt blue in. So I'm mixing it in with what I have just to slightly gray it down. Pointing it directly down at the paper, a little bit down over here to cool this a little bit more, like so. So it cools down. I don't worry about overspray that much because it's going to dissipate up there. Now, the top of the barn is the white of the snow, and I am going to be very carefully painting around that at this point, and I'm going to make a colorful statement on the barn itself. I'm leaving the silo alone for this at this particular point, but I'm going to take the brown matter here, and the barn is red, but it's not as red as a red barn. And I'm going to take, I took a little bit of burnt sienna, I'm going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue, and I'm going to start right over here by painting in the side of the barn. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to add more color to it so that it doesn't have just that one color floating through there. And as it gets down towards the snow area, I'm going to add a little bit of the cobalt blue to it, just a little bit, and a lot of water. And I'm going to allow this to have a little bit more flavoring of the coolness of the snow kind of bouncing back up. Again, ignoring what's in the photograph. And then I'm going to carry this right on through here like so. There's a little side shed attached to the barn here. And I'm going to take a little bit of that burnt sienna. I'm going to add it right in here. I want this barn to be fairly colorful. It's the focal point, so don't be afraid to use too much color. And then I'm going to bring this on down here. There's going to be some darker trees overlapping it, but that's why I'm painting this a little bit lighter back here. And as it goes off a little bit lighter, I don't need to worry about overlapping dark on top of it. It won't disappear on me. And I'm going to take some of that cobalt blue and I'm going to add it into the bottom again. Now I'm going to leave that dry just a little bit because I want this toned down with a little bit of the cobalt blue here where we see a cast shadow on the snow. Now, I'm going to go to the front of the barn. That actually, I'm assuming that the light is coming in this direction. You can't see it in the photograph, but the front of the barn on the lower part here is much darker. And I'm added the ultramarine blue to this. And I'm going to add the cobalt blue. Quite a bit of cobalt blue. And I'm going to paint right up against here. And this adds a little bit of an accent of color. But I'm going to take pure brown matter. And I'm going to paint that right in here so that the sides of the barn become very colorful. And you don't want that to be just one color red or one value red. You want it many different values. You want it several different variations of the red and with the blue thrown in there. I'm going to include this barn that's off to the left within there. and I'm just going to connect it. Having connected pieces, I can always go back and disconnect them and repaint some of them. Now, you can see through in a picture in this barn to the background. I've made it a solid. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to paint that. And I'm going to add a little bit of the straight brown matter to this. And you can see on how I'm moving around the picture. And I'm still waiting for this to dry. And I'm waiting for this to dry to do a little something with the roof, the trees, and so forth. And again, I'm going to take a little bit of the cobalt blue down towards the bottom. And I've made this barn fairly colorful. I'm not worried about making it realistic. Again, you're not painting the photograph. You are painting the painting. So I'm going to go in here now, and I'm going to add a little bit of color to this. And I'm going to take a little bit of that raw sienna, and I'm going to put that down towards the bottom. And as we go into the shadow, I'm going to add that cobalt blue with a little bit of that color. So we have so much color going on here. This is what you want. You don't want this to be all one color, all one value, all one temperature. You want as much variety as possible. Now, I have the top of the barn. That has even a little bit more red in it. So I'm going to take the brown madder and the raw sienna. The brown madder is a very strong color. It will overpower the raw sienna. So I increased the amount of raw sienna, as you can see. Come over here. I'm going to add a little bit of darkness underneath the eave there and allow it to blend in to the rest of it. I'm going to take a little bit of straight brown matter and I'm going to put that right in here. I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it so that it doesn't disconnect from the rest of the barn. I'm going to actually create a little bit of a sway in the roof right here. It's a little bit too straight for everything else. So I'm going to take a little bit of the cobalt here. And I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt up in here for that cast shadow off the eave so that we don't disconnect from the colors that we've already been using. And I'm going to run a little bit underneath here. So I'm waiting every time I do something that it doesn't bleed too much. And you can see that it's pretty much staying where it's at. So I'm going to put a little bit of here. So timing on the watercolor is very important. And it's something that I cannot teach, unfortunately. Now, we have the top of the silo, which is red, which I think is kind of a dysfunctional thing. So I'm leaving that alone. Now, I'm going to take my larger brush here. I'm going to clean my palette a little bit. And I'm not worried about the trees that go off in front, but I'm going to take a little bit of that cobalt blue here. And I am going to wash this down, a little bit of cast shadow on it, so that the eye doesn't follow that light all the way off the picture. And I'm going to run this in cast shadow here a little bit. So I'm running kind of cast shadows across there. Got a little bit of red in there, that's fine. Won't hurt anything. I just want a little bit of that white paint or white paper showing through at this particular point. I might cover a little bit more of it. Now I'm waiting for this and this to dry to deal with the roof values. And again, sometimes you have to push and pull your values from what the photograph is telling you. Now, this is the light is coming down through here. This would have more value on it than this would, and that this would. So this is your lightest roof. I'm leaving that alone for the time being. Now I'm going to take the same color with a little bit more red in it, and I am going to put the cast shadow, or not the shadow, but the shadow side of the silo. So that's toned down. A little bit of shadow in here. Not too much. I don't worry about little drips and drabs. That's going to bleed into there. That's fine. Gives it a little bit of character. And at this point, I am going to stop and leave it dry. So I need to take a picture for everybody. And it's still snowing out here. They say it stopped. I don't think they're watching the weather exactly right. So let me take a picture here.
And then I'd like to get the ladder back to make sure it's still recording.
So we're going to take a moment here, take a break. My wife is going to make sure that we're still recording. Now, while it's drying, I always felt it was important to step back and look at your work, decide what you're going to do next. Don't jump into the painting too fast. I'm waiting for this to dry just a little bit. But while we're still wet, or damp, I should say, I am going to lift out a little bit on the barn here to show that shadow, cast shadow from the eave a little bit more. And I'm going to do the same thing over here, but not as much. And it's okay that it has blemishes and so forth. There's nothing wrong with that. And I'm just pulling out a little bit of color there. So you have to be careful when you're doing that for the fact that you could get involved in doing too much. I'm going to pull a little bit of light off this shed here, off the side of the barn. And I'm going to cover this side of the snow that has gathered a little bit so it tones down. So we're getting the block in, and I'm going to pull out a little bit of color there. But this is where you should really be sitting on your hands to a great extent and watch the paint dry. There's more work I have to do in the background. I may or may not touch this over here for the fact that if I do too much, it's going to come forward. And with the trees I'm going to put in the foreground, it would complicate things a little bit too much with contrast of value, because I'm going to be pulling lightness of the trees out and putting in some darks, but those darks have to be a little bit darker than this, but not too much, because it will create too much contrast and attract the eye. So this is fairly dry. I'm going to go back in and I'm going to dry brush some things up here. You notice I'm not using green. I've changed these trees to a different kind of tree that will be a little bit on the warmer side. I decided not to use green because it's so limited in the photograph. I didn't really care to add anything. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to address this area, that ditch that's on that side, and I'm going to take a little bit of this blue and brown here, and I'm going to very lightly spritz it in, and to stop it from going on the barn, I'm going to put paper towel down. That's the easiest way to do it. I'm going to take a little bit of this warmer color. I've took out I think there's a road off to the right, or an area that has something for golf carts. You take a little bit of the cobalt blue, and then I take up the paper towel, and this is where you go in with your smaller brush, and I want to manipulate that just a little bit, because it never goes in exactly, but what it does is it gives you a random pattern that you normally wouldn't be painting. because humans don't do things as random patterns. They like to do things that are equal, make sense to them in their head. This will give you an automatic random pattern. And I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine blue into the mix here as I'm doing this. And I'm going to add a little bit more ultramarine over here, being in shadow. So this becomes very colorful. Again, take your time. And I'm going to add a little bit of that warm color back in the front here. Very small brush strokes, nothing too exciting. But what it does is it gives you that texture in the midground, I should say. And then I go back off over here. I'm going to work with this later. But what I'm going to go to now is I'm going to go back up into these trees. And I'm going to dry brush a lot of that up there. So I'm going to take the burnt sienna and some of this blue here and a little bit of that's the cobalt blue. Here's the ultramarine blue. And kind of keep it on the neutral side. It's a grayed down reddish yellow brown, and I tap the brush off. And I'm going to use the side of my brush, and I'm going to begin by dry brushing on the side. And I'm going to be very careful about the top of the barn here. And if it gets too scratchy, which it does occasionally, I'm going to go in and I'm going to take a little bit of water and soften it. And I'm going to add a little bit more of the cobalt blue to it and go off to the side over here so that, again, every 5, 6, 7 brush strokes, I am changing my color, my temperature, my value, so that it doesn't have a constant repeat of the color going across. So I am darkening this in here. One of the things that I found when I was working as a student, I experiment with different things like rocks and so forth, and I would find a really neat way to do them, and I ended up, all my rocks looked the same. So I had to be very careful about what I was doing. Now I'm going to take the burnt sienna, a little bit of the brown matter, mix it into this, and I want a little bit more of a colorful statement here. Again, being very careful around the barn and the silo. And I'm going to take a little bit of the yellow medium that we're using to give it a little bit more color here. And I want to really soften this up a little bit, so I'm going to take the cobalt blue. We got a little bit of a hole here, and I am going to hit this with a little bit of blue here and there. And it will flatten off a little bit. So I'm going to take the yellow and go around the silo very easily, simply, and then down into the lower part here. And I'm going to soften this all up, back up in here. Now I'm going to take a little bit of the blue, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue so that this will fade away. I'm also going to take my toothbrush, clean it, and I am going to add a little bit of water up in here that it will soften that right up in there. So we're getting a little bit of variety here. Take a little bit of the blue and again, grayed down yellow, and I'm going to drag this down in here too. And then a lot of water. I'm going to take what I put down on the board, and I'm just simply going to go across and use that pigment like so. And I kind of like a little bit more warmth to the silo because it is a lighter color, and I'm going to allow that color to seep in on the shadow side, because a white object will reflect the color around it. Now, at this point, I'm looking at what do I need to do? Should I do anything else while I'm here? What I feel I need to do, I'm going to clean the palette off here. And I'm going to take a little bit of the cobalt blue. And I need to tone this hill down now. I'm being very careful not to lose too much of my white at this point. But I'm taking a cobalt blue. It has a little bit of warmth on there. And I am going to tone this hill down, especially as it gets up into the trees. It's going to have a little bit of shadow. I'm going to go across the top of this roof here. And then I'm going to use a lot of water. And I'm going to cast shadows moving up the hill. Like so. It's going to be lighter up here, a little bit darker up as it goes into the trees. And then down towards the bottom, where it goes down the hill, I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt blue down in here, because it kind of goes down in that gully. In the photograph, you don't see that, so I'm making an assumption of that's what happens. So now we're getting a little bit more encompassed with what we're doing. I'm going to have cast shadows going across this roof, but I don't know where because I haven't put the trees in yet. So I'm going to be very careful about that. Now, this is still wet up here, and I can scratch in some lighter value trees where it's still wet. And these are things that will help come forward a little bit. Like so. And I'm going to hold this up to the camera so you can see that just a little bit better. If you can see that on how those scratches give the illusion of trees in the background. If you overdo it, it's going to come forward. So I'm just simply being careful when you have a light value object. I'm going to take a little bit more of that cobalt and drop it in here and there so that it won't appear to be too flat. As long as it's wet and glistening, you can go back into it. If that glistening is gone, it is not a good idea to go back into it, because then you'll end up with what you call those blooms. Now, as I'm looking at this, we have a lot of light going all the way across here. And you're making decisions at different times to, what do I do next? How am I going to do it? And where do I need to put it? So I'm being very careful and cautious. But I need to tone this section down at least 1/3 of this span out in front of the barn. So this could be in shadow. And I'm going to take that cobalt blue, just a little bit. And I'm going to take a little bit of the raw sienna. I'll take it from out here, just to slightly gray it down, because if it's too intense over here, it's going to attract the eye again. So I am going to add the cast shadow coming through here. And I'm then going to go to my smaller brush and have this kind of a little bit more of an interest going on out here than what was in the photograph. When it's an overcast day, you're not going to see distinct shadows. I've made this a little bit brighter than what it is in the photograph, so that I feel it's going to read better. And that's what we want to do. And I'm going to have this go down the hill and down the hill. So I'm following the curvature of what's going on. Now, if I feel that it's too strong, come in with a toothbrush with water and start softening all this. And you'll start to see things get softened. So I take my sponge, and I'm just going to soften a little bit here and there. Then I'm going to take a picture of this.
And we're going to check the video.
And my wife's going to check the video. So we're starting to make a little bit more progress here. So we have to wait for this to dry. Not too long ago, we had the wind blowing quite violently, gust of wind, and the snow started falling in front of the house, and the woods disappeared for about 30 seconds. It's quite interesting. And I was waiting for this to dry, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to take the cobalt blue and a little bit of the brown matter. The reason being the brown matter is that we're going to go up against the barn with putting this in shadow here. So I'm taking something that is a color that's near the barn, which is the red. And I'm just going to go and tone this down just a little bit. Not much. 1-2 brush strokes, leave it. Don't overbrush it. And we're going to leave that dry for a moment. Yeah, we got about, I would say, 15 inches of snow on the deck rail out back here at this point. That's my barometer, because if the wind blows, it blows it off. But back here, it hasn't been blowing too much. So the best thing is to leave this dry. Don't feel that you need to toy with it. This is falling off very nice. This is nice and soft up against the sky on the first wash and the second wash. So what I did on the second wash is I did take a little bit of water here and hit it, and so that it just sort of drifts into the sky. Because remember, sharp edges will attract the eye. So I'm trying to keep things very soft in the background. We have a little bit of color going on back there. It relates to the barn to a great degree. You don't want to isolate color. Or the thing that I've had students do in the past is that about halfway through a painting, they'll add another color, tube of color to what they're doing, and that will throw the painting off. Stay with the paint that you started with and utilize that. So I'm adding a little bit of cobalt blue in here. I want to push out the silo just a little bit more. And I'm going to drag that up and soften it. Just enough to kind of accent and push that out just a little bit more. Not worried about how it's scalloped on top of the thing. That's part of the character of painting. A lot of people would use a ruler to draw their painting or before they start painting. And what you're doing is you're losing the character of the line that you're drawing because we don't draw things exactly straight all the time. I'm just neatening up some edges here all the time. You don't want to use a ruler at any time because it can kill a painting very quickly. Now, I had said this is fairly dry. I haven't touched that in a while. I said before that sometimes I want to go darker to push this back and pull this forward. Sometimes you may need to make a decision on maybe lightening it, this forward barn, just to get a little bit of light in here. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show a little bit of light hitting there. And that pushes that back. That way I can add a little bit of dark here, but I won't add it next to the barn, but I'll add it as this barn turns over from the light area to the shadow area. So I'm going to take a little bit of the ultramarine blue, a little bit of the brown matter here. And I'm always utilizing my paint that's on the tray here so that we don't waste that much. So I'm going to add a little bit of dark there. It'll turn it off into the shadow a little bit easier. And then take just a damp brush and tone it down. I'm going to take an accent of a little bit of blue here. And I'm going to run it underneath the eaves here. just a slight bit, and then soften it with the damp brush. Now I'm going to do the same thing underneath the eaves over here. This is the eave as it sticks out. You're not getting too much light there, like so. That punctuates it just a little bit. And I'm going to go up on top of the barn up here and straighten this out just a little bit. And I'm going to do this coming along there. So you're seeing this turn over into shadow. I'm going to add a little bit of straight ultramarine blue right into that color. It's always going to be a little bit darker nearest us, which would be down here, not up there. And I am going to take my 1-inch flat, and what I want to do is I want to straighten out the top of the barn here, and I want to soften it as it goes back. Now I can always redo a couple things here if needed. I feel that this is kind of important, so I am recalibrating the point in the roof because I did lose it a little bit. Then I'll leave that dry, and I'll go back in with a smaller brush again with the same combination of ultramarine blue and brown matter, and just accent that just a little bit. It's nothing that important at this point. Now, this is dry enough to go back into. So as you move around the painting, there's areas that are going to be wet, areas that are going to be dry, and I've let this dry just enough, and I am going to put in some trees back here. And like I said, there are pine trees that are in the photograph. I am not going to do the pine trees because I don't feel it's needed. It'll kind of go outside the color unity that I'm looking for in this particular painting. Maybe if I did it again, I would change my tubes of paint and utilize the green. So I am going to make sure the palette is pretty clean now. I do this quite often during the painting. I'll clean the palette, change the water so that things don't get dirty. Now, the type of tree I want to put in here, I'm going to add trees in there that are off over on that side, but minus the pine trees. So I'm going to take my smaller round brush here, and I'm going to do some kind of warmish color. So I'm taking the ultramarine blue, a little bit of the burnt sienna, and a little bit of the ultramarine blue, just to slightly gray it. And I'm going to use a lot of water. So what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to put these in lightly. And it's really for placement. And I'm being very careful how I'm placing them. The thickness, thin, so that they're not all the same. I'm going to be very careful in the spacing of the trees because we don't want to have Martha Stewart out here planting trees in a row. So they're going to stop and start in different areas. Down here, as you can see. This is the first pass at them. So I'm being somewhat on the cautious side. I'm going to make this one a little bit larger, so I'm alternating the size well enough to give enough variety. And I'm not taking them all the way up and out at this time. I'll do that a little bit later on towards the end of the painting on how much effort I want to put into there. So be very careful on how much you're going to do. And then over here, I'm doing them very quickly so that there's no attention put to them. The ones I'm doing a little bit more carefully are more in the focal point area. Now, what I need to do, since this little barn is dry, is I'm taking the brown matter and I am adding the ultramarine blue to it. I got a little bit of that burnt sienna in here, so it's already grayed down. And I need to emphasize the dark on this guy back here. So I add a little bit more ultramarine. Again, not too much attention to it because it's such a small element in the painting. It just needs to be honed a little bit more in value. Now, I'm going to go into the side of the barn before I come across over here. So I'm jumping from here to here, over to here, and then back again. So I'm going to go to the middle, and I want to define these edges a little bit more as I come through. So I'm taking that brown matter, some ultramarine blue, and a little bit more brown matter, and a little bit of burnt sienna. And I'm going to take a little bit of water. We need a little bit more ultramarine blue. So sometimes when you're mixing up a dark color, you can't see what color you have. Take some water and go through it and see what color that is so that you can determine whether you're going to use it or not. So I'm going to come up to here and I'll put a brush stroke down as I've done quite a lot, and then I'll take a little bit of other color and I will add some other color interest into this. And then I'll just take water and kind of run that pigment out on the paper a little bit. I'm not trying to make it flat by any means. I'm trying to make it somewhat interesting. I'm going to leave that alone on the bottom here because I like the way it just goes up into the barn. And I'm going to take a little bit more ultramarine blue, and I want to put this underneath the eave here a little bit more, like so. I'm going to go up in here. I'm going to have to fix that again. And I'm going to take a little bit of brown matter with the raw sienna, which really kind of gives you a nice orangey look, and a little bit of the blue to gray it. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put this a little bit more across through here, take a little bit more of the brown matter, and I am just simply dabbing color on at this point. I should be a little bit more careful and not go too far. But sometimes when you get that seepage like this happening, there's nothing really wrong with it. I'm going to bring that on down to the roof of the barn. And then I will kind of pick it up a little bit. And that helps keep that on the softer side. If it's too much, I'll pick it up later. Now I'm going to emphasize this a little bit more. I noticed there are no real definite openings. I can see some of them on the barn. I'm going to make them up as we get down towards the end. And I'm going to take just some brown matter and I'm going to put it up in here while it's still damp and create the little feeling of the boards coming down. not too much. I'm going to add a little bit of warmth here. And I'm going to go a little bit over that blue. I got a little bit too blue on me, but that's fine. I can always lift later. Now, this one I'm not even going to touch for the fact that it's fine by itself. All the emphasis is in here. I'm going to pull a little bit of that up. And I am going to pull a little bit up here on the roof. It's seeped in a little bit too much. And using a paper towel hopefully will stop the seeping. Doesn't all the time, but usually it does. And again, I'm trying to fix the top of this barn. It won't. I got a surefire way to do it, but I'm trying to not do this at this point. It's not all that important. So back to the other part of the painting. I'm going to go into the silo a little bit. How much I want to put on the silo, I'm going to try to keep it minimal. So I am going to paint in the accent part, which they call the core part of the shadow. That's what makes it kind of turn over a little bit, which is a whole nother lesson. Now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to soften the top of that. Then I'm going to soften this a little bit. And then I'm going to go in and paint that. I added a little part of the silo here where it's it's on the photograph, but I enhanced it a little bit more. And take some of the raw sienna and add that into there so that, again, it kind of complements the background a little bit. Like so. Now, I'm going to come in with some trees over here. I'm going to take my smaller brush and my rigger. Both of these will be used. Again, not worried about these trees over here. I'm waiting for certain parts of this to dry. And how much or how little you want to put in, this is where you have to be careful. And I'm going to slowly creep back to the center. And I'm going to put some trees in front, but not as many as we've seen. Now, you saw what happened here. I don't know what I did. I think I picked it up accidentally with the paper towel. So I'm going to put that back in so that it dries. See, I do make mistakes. I don't know what I did there. I'll have to look at the video when I'm done. Okay. So I am going to first put in there's a shrub back there, and it's mostly the raw sienna. I'm going to add a little bit of the burnt sienna to it with a lot of water. Tap it down. And I like the balance of this because this will help transition to these things here down in the gully. And I'm being very careful. I'm going to add another one right here, smaller one. And what I'm doing now, this was not planned. Sometimes I'm allowing the painting to tell me what it needs. You'll have artists tell you that, oh, they plan everything out from start to finish. You can do that. Takes a little bit more thought, which is fine. But I like sometimes to let the painting tell me what I need to do to it. So I'm adding a little bit of that barn color in back here. And that kind of completes the connection to the sides of the painting. Now, I'm looking at, this is the thing, I look around the whole painting at the same time. I'm going to add a little bit more color back here to tone this down. And I'm going to add a little bit of that brown matter. mix it in with the little bit of the blue. And I'm going to tone this side of the barn down. And a little bit of water so that it doesn't get too scratchy. There, that's a little bit better. But I always jump around the paintings. That forces me not to work on one area too long, because you can't finish one area without looking at other areas in the painting. You have to have a relationship going on. And I'm adjusting a few things here. I'm putting in some boards that you can see. I don't want to put in too many, it will confuse with the trees. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to signify a few things on the front of the barn here. And I'm making sure that they are unequally put in. I'm going to do the same thing here. It starts giving it a little bit more character. And these things you can work on for hours with little things here and there. Don't get caught up in doing too many little things. Okay. I'll make adjustments on that later. Now, I'm going to start with the trees over here, as I said before. So I'm going to mix up some warmer colors and cooler colors, and I'm going to start with the trees. And I'm going to go up and out. And I'm going to take some of the cobalt blue, and I am going to simply allow them to overlap. I'm not going to put in as many trees as what's in the photograph, because it would get as busy as, I don't know what, Grand Central Station. So this is kind of a grayed down blue. And I'm going to put one over here. So I start allowing things to separate. This is a group, and I'm going to put in a tree that is further away from the group, and a couple over here that are going to be not noticed as much for the fact they'll block the barn a little bit, but these trees over here will kind of suffice. Now I need another tree here to balance that off, and I think I'm going to do one right next to it, like so. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of the cobalt blue while I've got the trees there. I'm going to gray it a slight bit with the yellow, and I'm going to put in some cast shadow. Some lighter than others. Just allow it to go down into the barn, up the barn and across the roof. This is why I kept this on the lighter side. Now I'm going to take the rigger with a mixture of everything I have, including the blue, and I am going to start putting in some finer handling of the tops of the trees. Very light, wispy. Do not make them too dark, because the darker they are, the more they'll attract the attention of the viewer, and this is something that you don't need a lot of attraction over here. I'm going to bring it right up into the sky there. Have them go off in different directions. As they come down lower on the tree, they spread almost perpendicular to the tree. As they go up the tree, they have a tendency of reaching more for the sun. So try to keep their trees looking good. Now I'm going to take a couple accents of blue here and there into the trees, which will help bond with the background. Now, a little bit of detail here and there, and we'll see where we're at. Then take a damp brush here and kind of soften that out. Now we're getting down towards the last things we need to do for the painting. We're going to be careful with that. I am going to put a few more trees in here. Now, I have a grouping here and a grouping here. We need a small grouping right about in here. I don't want it out in front so much. So I'm going to be very careful in how I'm going to do this. And as I said before, not everything was planned in the painting down to the final degree. I usually have it planned about halfway through to 2/3 of the way through, for the simple fact that I do like to have the painting tell me what's going on. I'm going to add a few branches coming out here at the bottom. And overlapping the barn there on the far left side. That should help a little bit for a connection. Now the other grouping of trees I'm going to put right here. And what I need to do is I need to play, you have two choices. You can play light off of dark, or you can play dark off of light. I'm going to play the light off the dark. So I'm going to lift my trees towards the bases, so that not all the trees will be looking alike for the most part. So I am going to take and I'm going to lift up, starting right here with my damp brush, and I'm going to go right up through the roof. Be careful not to come out at the peak, and I'm going to repeat that so that I'm playing the dark off the light. Now, if you're dragging the color of the barn over the roof, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That helps you establish the rest of the tree. You can model that later. As I come up into here, I'm going to go back to the dark side. Usually they tell you go towards the light, but I'm going towards the dark. And I'm going to bring that up through here like this. And this is a repeated lifting method with your brush until you get to your desired lightness. And I'm being very careful, taking my time, up and out. And I don't think I'm going to put a lot of trees here, for the simple fact that it would be getting too busy, hiding the barn too much. And I'm going to bring one right off of here, starting a little bit further down, like so. And I'm going to take it off on this side of the lean-to on the barn. Let that dark be there, and I'm going to carry that up through the roof, like so. So I'm being very careful on how I'm placing these. A lot of thought has to go into what you're doing before you do anything. I can tell you only from experience how many paintings I've ruined by rushing back in, which I think Elvis said that only fools rush in. It's a bad joke, but I'm going to use it. And I'm going to bring this up here like so and out a little bit over here. So you can see that yellowness playing off the grayness, gray-blue of the sky really creates a nice light. And I want to get this tree a little bit more heaviness to it. And having two younger ones alongside of it and branch off a little bit. Like so. Another branch off over here. And I'll add the smaller branches as we progress through this. I'm going to take a look at the windows next, but I think I got to still deal with these trees over here, but I want to make sure that I had the trees where I wanted them. They're unevenly spaced from here to here, from there to there. This is kind of dark, this is kind of cool. I'm going to finish off these trees next, and I'm going to take the burnt sienna and the ultramarine blue and a little bit of the brown matter. And I am going to emphasize a few of these things a little bit more. I'm going to take the ultramarine blue and the cobalt that's on the tray there. And I'm always very conscious where they start down here, so it looks like some are further back, some are closer. I'm going to take a lot more cobalt, or the ultramarine blue, and I'm going to go in and start adding in the rest of these trees. The tops of them, that is. And again, I'm being somewhat on the careful side, making each brushstroke count at this point. That was a little bit too much. Now I'm going to take my rigger here, and I am going to add in some smaller saplings down here to help fill that space. I'll work the space in a little bit later. Haven't adjusted for the windows yet, so I'm getting there. But I'm being very careful, slowing down the process quite a bit. At the beginning, it's very fast, so I'm doing a lot of little things at this point. So you're getting down to smaller and smaller brushstrokes areas. I'm still looking at some of these trees over here need to be enhanced a little bit. Not a whole lot. I still need to put a little bit more dark right here to turn that off into the shadow. Need a little bit wetter brush. There we go. I don't want to overwork that. I don't want to make it look perfect. But it's getting to where I don't want to touch it. And I have to be careful about how I'm putting things in at this point. So, back to the rigger. I'm going to put a few saplings out in front of the barn here to complement the larger trees. So I've compensated for all those trees that were in front of the barn, making much smaller statements than what that photograph was telling me. Now I'm going to take some of this burnt sienna here, and I'm going to add a little description in on some of these trees, not too much. And again, very casual. You want to do a few brush strokes, stop, take a look at it. Do not try to overdo it. I'm not going to do anything with the tops of the trees because that's going to drag your eye up much too far. So I'm getting down to the final handling of this. And again, I've got to clean this off for some of the accents I want to put in. Clean this off. And this is where you step back from your painting, look at it for 10, 15 minutes, have a cup of coffee, decide what you want to do. I am going to create some darker darks here, and I'm going to put in some windows, again, very casually. And not all the same. They're just indications of where windows or doors may be, just to add a little bit of interest. So a lot of these little details are all the final touches. And I'm still looking at this area here. It's too light. I'm going to tone that down. But first I want to get the rest of these windows in. And I feel I need to lift out this here because I don't want it dark, I want it light. And the same thing with this side of the tree. Bring it up and drag some of that color from the trees up into there. I'm going to kind of pull out a little bit of light here and there on those. What I want to do, we have all this warm color here. I am going to take the cobalt blue, slightly grayed down, with a little bit of the yellow and the red, and I'm going to make a cooler statement off of these. Something that will push it away from the background and the barn a little bit more. Doesn't have to be perfect, just a suggestion. Now, this is the point that I look at the whole thing and say, okay, what are all the little things I need to do? Are there anything left? Yeah, I'm going to tone this barn, part of this barn down here, so that my eye doesn't follow this. I need to also tone this down. This needs to be a little bit more enhanced, so I'm taking that cobalt blue, a little bit of the grayness that I have with the reddish brown here, and I'm going to do another wash very quickly in here. And I want to do an accent of that wash down in the gully here. Just a few things that will push things back or push things forward at the same time. You don't want it to be being too flat, so I'm adding value here to separate this roof from this roof. Just a little bit. You don't have to be perfect. And I still need value through there because that light is not going to be as bright there, contrasting. Now, I have a few more things to add here. We have a little cast shadow across there, a little one here. I'm going to emphasize this cast shadow here a little bit more. Travel down. And with things that are popping out here and there. I'm going to hit a few accents of color here and there. We didn't use the yellow a lot, but I didn't want to, we used it for grain in some instances, but I didn't want it to overtake anything. So I want to add a little bit of yellow up in here, a little bit of texture up in here with that yellow color, the raw sienna and the yellow itself. And I transfer some of that color down in front. Take a look at it before I take the tape off. And I'm going to take a little bit of that grayed down blue here with lots of water. And I'm going to take that and tone that ridge down as it goes down into that area ever so slightly. And then manipulate it with the wrong brush. I added too much. There we go. Just a few accents of some of these colors we've been using helps to give it a little bit of sparkle. So I'm adding some accents of the cobalt blue here and there. And I think that that travels off fine. Probably a little bit more cobalt up against the barn itself, and then tone this down again. When you tone things down, make sure your wash is deliberate and very quick, and don't go over it again, because it will start picking up your pigment. I'm going to hit that with the sponge. I just wanted this a little bit cooler in there. And a couple little things on the silo. I'm going to lift up my board a little bit. I want to put in some of the accents. Sometimes if you do it too much, you need to take it off. So let's see what this looks like without the tape on. So it looks much different and less busy than the photograph. It's something that you have to learn how to simplify things for a painting. And if you're not sure, let it sit there a day. Look at it with a cup of coffee in hand. And decide, are you done? Are you not done? What do I need to do? Or do I need to do anything? So I think we are done at this point. We will see you next week.
Tell them about calling you tomorrow night.
And don't forget to send the email to me tomorrow night if you've painted it sometime between now and then, or anytime during Saturday. I will get back to you.
You'll check their steps too.
I will check your steps if you're taking pictures in between. I'm adding a little bit of blue right here. But send anything and everything to me, and if you need to call me, please call me.
And Sunday too.
And Sunday too, if you wish.
Okay.
Everybody have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you don't get snowed in like we did. Bye-bye.